Mirror Force is a normal trap that can negate an opponent's attack and destroy all their attack position monsters. So why did it get banned? Mirror Force is a very old card that was game warping throughout most of its existence. Because it was both a reactionary and one-sided board wipe, it would often swing entire games off of its activation. It was so dangerous that many players would opt out of lethal lines simply because they would lose to Mirror Force. It fundamentally changed how you have to approach the game and attacking in general, since unlike Sakuretsu armor, this one would wipe your board. It was banned in 2004 on Yu-Gi-Oh's first ever ban list, and it would be limited in 2005, banned 6 months later, limited 6 months after that, and would stay at 1 for 6 years before going to 2 in 2012 and 3 in 2014. So what happened? Mirror Force, and by extension battle traps in general, really haven't aged well. The fact they have to sit on the field until the opponent is ready to attack means that they have ample time to remove it or negate it. Battle traps haven't been good for almost 10 years now, and it's unlikely that will change. Yata-garasu is a level 2 spirit monster that has a normal restriction of not being able to be special summoned and bounces itself during the end phase, and if it deals battle damage, it skips the opponent's next draw phase. So why did it get banned? Yata's a very old card released all the way back in 2003. On release, it was nothing more than a gimmicky win condition, since if you were in a position where Yata could deal battle damage, you were probably in a winning position and Yata could easily lock up the game. The problem was that this was just way worse than playing better monsters. However, with the release of Invasion of Chaos, and specifically Chaos Emperor Dragon, Yata will become one of the most infamous cards ever. It could always lock up games, but it needed a clear board and most importantly a clear hand. Chaos Emperor Dragon did both of these effortlessly. With a Sangan and Witch of the Black Forest on field, you could summon CED, nuke everything, search for Yata, normal it, and your opponent would have to sit through a very slow and painful defeat, 200 damage at a time. It would be banned in 2004 on the first ever ban list and wouldn't go back to 3 until 2023. So what happened? Yata was never a good card. It only ever got broken because CED existed. Without it, the card is terrible and would have been bad if it was unbanned in 2006, let alone 2023. Engage is a normal spell that can only be activated while you have no monsters in your main monster zone. It has a Sky Striker card from deck to hand, and if you have 3 spells in grave, it draws you a card, not once per turn. So why did it get banned? Sky Striker was a very powerful deck on release back in 2018. It was a much slower, more control-oriented deck amongst a sea of combo decks. It had a whole host of versatile spells that could adapt to the current situation, and this was all possible because of Engage. Who would have guessed that a non-once per turn rotor that can also just be Pot of Greed would be busted? Engage was also useful as a part of a mini engine in other decks. Engage lets you add Hornet Drones, which summons a token, link the token into Kagari, add back Hornet Drones, make another token, and now you had 2 free bodies that can be turned into many different things. It would be banned in 2020 to end Sky Striker's 2-year-long reign as competitive deck. So what happened? Sky Striker got super power crept. The game is sped up to a point where Sky Striker decks just aren't able to accrue enough advantage when compared to modern decks. Sky Striker has gotten new support and is a decent rogue deck currently. The cards are still individually powerful though. They saw meta success earlier this year in some Malice decks and are expected to be good with the upcoming Yummy archetype. This is a case where a card was unbanned at the right time and it fits right in with modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Thunder Dragon Colossus is a fusion monster that was always summoned by its alternative condition of tributing a Thunder monster, provided a Thunder monster's effect was activated in the hand that turn. It stopped your opponent from adding cards from the deck to the hand except by drawing, and you could banish Thunder from grave to protect itself from being destroyed. So why did it get banned? Colossus was and still is a very powerful floodgate. Being draw and lockboard on an indestructible body was crazy. During toss format, Colossus was a house. It was a great floodgate for any of the non-Orcust decks of the time and was very difficult to out as well. It got even more disgusting combined with other engines like Crusadia and Gardrag. Colossus will be banned in 2020, would stay there for 4 years before getting unlimited in 2024. So what happened? Colossus' effect has not been power crept. Droll is still a staple to this day. The problem is that it's only usable going first, since it's just an endboard piece, and that there isn't a good way to summon it. Thunder Dragons have been severely power crept for years now, and Colossus doesn't change that. While yes, it can be summoned generically with Nemesis Corridor, which can be searched off Cupid Pitch, if you got to this point, you've already won. Miragestallio is a generic rank 3 that can detach a special as Salamangreat from deck, but locks you into only using fire monsters' effects. And if it's sent to grave as material for a Salamangreat Link monster, you get to bounce a monster. So why did it get banned? Salamangreat was a powerful mid-range deck that saw play around 2019 with the release of their structure deck. It was a very low to the ground deck that was able to make weaker but very consistent boards every turn, often backed up by hand traps. Stallia was integral to all of Salamangreat's combos since it could summon whatever you needed from deck, potentially break boards going second with its bounce, and could be made off a single Gazelle. Stallia was banned alongside Engage, Colossus, and Harp Horror to mark the end of toss format and to cycle out the deck that had dominated for the last year. So what happened? Salamangreat has fully been eclipsed by much stronger decks, and Negate and follow-up just isn't enough anymore, and its consistency is no longer a unique asset since all decks are built to be hyper-consistent. Who would have guessed the 6-year-old deck wouldn't be able to keep up? Harp is a dark machine that can be banished from grave to summon an Orcust from deck, then locks you into darks. So why did it get banned? Don't let that short effect fool you. This card was incredibly strong. Orcust was a deck that was very hard to stop once it got its engine rolling, and Harp was very crucial for this. Because of lore, Harp is able to be sent to grave of Orcust Nightmare, which is able to be summoned by Nightmare Mermaid, which is able to be summoned using any Nightmare, which are able to be summoned with any 2 monsters. Because of this, Orcust actually found success as an engine in other decks, and Harp's ability to condense several cards into itself was very valuable. It was nice to have Harp pull triple duty of giving a body, a banished Orcust name, and access to either symbol or Nightmare. Harp will be banned in 2020 to end toss format, and wouldn't be unbanned until 2024. So what happened? A combination of Orcust getting power crept and Konami making new Orcust support led to Harp's unban. Prior to the new support, Orcust was an okay engine to play in mid-range and control decks, but after the support, it became a top contender again. As of writing, Orcust has won the North America World Championship qualifier, which is a big deal. It's seeing success alongside Mitsurugi, Azamina, and Fiendsmith, and overall is a very healthy deck. Thousand Eyes is a fusion monster whose material never matters since it was always shielded out by Metamorphosis or Instant Fusion. It stops all other monsters from changing their battle positions and attacking, and can equip a monster your opponent controls to itself to gain its stats and destruction protection. So why did it get get banned? Thousand Eyes Restrict was a staple in early Yu-Gi-Oh! Its ability to lock down the field was very powerful in a world where combat was important. It being a level 1 monster meant that Metamorphosis could easily cheat it out by simply tributing a goat token, which was very common in goat format. It would eventually be banned because it slowed every game down to a crawl and wouldn't come back until 2016, 10 years later. While Metamorphosis was now banned, Instant Fusion now existed, and Thousand Eyes saw a stint of play as an Instant Fusion target. The fact that it attached monsters to itself let it bypass protections. So what happened? Thousand Eyes' effects just don't hold up. Stopping attacks isn't that important, its attached not being a quick effect also really hurts. This card had its time in the spotlight, got a bit of a comeback, but now gets to sit in the retirement home with all of his other goat buddies. Ring of Destruction is a normal trap that pops a monster that burns both players equal to the attack of the monster. So why did it get banned? Ring was the premier removal card for the entirety of the DM and GX era. It was the only quick effect removal with no real downside. The burn, despite it being reciprocal, was mostly positive. It meant you could clean up games by popping your opponent's biggest monster while they were low, or popping your own monsters after you attack to double up on damage. One more thing is that because Ring damaged both players at the same time, it was very easy to force draws with this card. This would get the card limited only a month after release. It would stay at 1 for 2 years before getting banned in 2005. It would come back in 2006 and will get banned again exactly 1 year later in 2007. So what happened? Ring was unfortunately the recipient of a crippling errata back in 2015. Basically, you can't game your opponent unless their life is equal to the attack of the destroyed monster. You can only target your opponent's monsters, and you take the damage first, so there's no draws. I get the idea behind these changes. You don't want to force draws, and being able to burn for a huge amount of damage by popping your own monster was a fine change, but this is just a different card. It's all little play when it came back because it is still generic removal with no real cost, but by this point there were just better cards to play. Chaos Emperor Dragon can be summoned by banishing a light and dark from grave, and you can pay 1,000 life points and send all cards from both players' hand and field to grave, and your opponent takes 300 damage for each of their cards sent. So why did it get banned? I think reading the effect is enough to tell you why it got banned, but if you didn't figure it out, a full board wipe and hand rip is a little broken, but the Yata lock is what made this card truly unbeatable. If you had Sangan and Witch of the Black Forest on the field and used Emperor Dragon's effect, you could search Yata-garasu, normal it, then attack your opponent. They would skip their draw phase due to Yata's effect, and since they have no cards in hand and have no way to get more, they lose. This is what would turn the limited list into the forbidden and limited list. Lots of old cards weren't well tested, and Konami needed to have a way to fix this, banning Emperor Dragon 5 months after print. So what happened? ZED got an errata that actually doesn't change the effect. It's still a full board and hand wipe. However, they gave it a stipulation that you can't activate other cards that turn use the effect. This errata obviously makes it unplayable in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, which is just sad. Let the guy who created the ban list stay there forever, not whatever this is. Both of these cards have similar effects. They both add any monster with 7 field to grave. Sangan searches anything with 1500 or less attack, and Witch searches anything with 1500 or less defense. So why'd they get banned? Sangan and Witch are old school staples that were played in pretty much everything. They acted as generic recruiters that triggered when destroy card effects or were tributed for a tribute summon. They would be so ubiquitous they would both be quickly restricted. They would stay at 1 for a while until Yata-garasu and Chaos Emperor Dragon started locking people out of drawing, and these two were able to facilitate it. They would both be banned on the first ever ban list in 2004, and while Witch would be stuck there until 2017, Sangan got out in 2005. Sangan would be banned in 2013 for its use in Dino Rabbit and Wind Up, though he would eventually be unbanned in 2017, a few months before Witch. So what happened? They both received an errata. However, these erratas aren't actually that bad. They were given once per turn restrictions, and you can't activate the effects of the monster you search until the end of the turn. Witch hasn't seen much play since the errata, but Sangan was actually played in Crusadia for a bit. Since those monsters can inherently summon themselves, they get around Sangan's restrictions. Honestly, the existence of Almirage and Artemis means these two could see play again. They're both full yummy combo. Stratos is a wind warrior that on summon can either add a hero monster or pop back row up to the amount of other heroes you control, not once per turn. So why did it get banned? Stratos was a 2015 card released in 2007. This was a time where the fact that Stratos was a +1 was a huge deal, especially during a time when gadgets were being played just because they were +1s. Now you get to do that but search a monster with a real effect. Fun fact, because the TCG and OCG had a shared ban list at the time, Stratos would actually be released limited since it was already limited in the OCG, meaning Stratos would have been at 3 for the first time in 2019. Small correction, Stratos was a Shonen Jump promo card that officially released in April 2007, and Stratos was limited in March 2007. However, some players had access to the manga as early as February, meaning that if you somehow had the means, you could play 3 copies of Stratos for a few weeks, and some players actually did for the one SJC that was held at the time. Regardless, this card would see play in every deck that played heroes: Perfect Circle, DDT, Little City, Hero Beat, Diva Hero, and more. It would be banned in 2013 alongside many other staples from the time. It would come to 1 in 2018, 2 in 2019, and then 3 later that year. So what happened? Stratos was just too ahead of its time. Had it come out in 2014 or 15, it would have fit right in alongside other cards like it. It currently sees play in hero decks, though they haven't been nearly as good as they have in the past. The only part of the text that matters is that if you have no back row, you could summon this card from grave during the end phase, not once per turn. So why did it get banned? FTKs, yeah! This card was terrible for years since it's just a worse version of Treeborn Frog. However, in 2018, it would be paired alongside Topologic Bomber Dragon, Trickstar Black Catbat, and the new release Nightmare Cerberus to form a new FTK. You'd have Bomber Dragon in the EMZ with Cerberus co-linked with it and Catbat to gain Cerberus' destruction protection. Then all you needed was Samsara Lotus in grave and move to the end phase. Lotus would reborn to his own Bomber Dragon points to, destroy Lotus, triggering Catbat to burn for 200. Then just repeat until the opponent either scooped or lost. Lotus would be banned in 2018, killing the FTK. So what happened? This FTK was good, but like most FTK FDKs was very interruptible. Back in 2018, Callby was at 3, Magical Midbreaker Field was at 3, Isolde, Pre-Rata Firewall Dragon, and Summon Stork were also legal. Now that all these cards have been hindered in one form or another, FDKs are way harder to pull off. That coupled with hand traps becoming better and more prevalent is why this FDK is allowed to exist. It even has a 1-card combo, but it loses to every hand trap in existence, so it's bad. The big dragon rules all have 3 effects. They can be summoned from hand or grave by banishing 2 dragons and or monsters of their respective attribute. They add a dragon of their attribute when they are banished, and they can be discarded alongside a monster of their attribute to do a unique effect. Notably, each can only use 1 effect per turn. The babies all can discard themselves plus a dragon and or monster with their attribute to summon their respective daddy ruler from the deck. So why'd they get banned? The dragon rulers were way ahead of their time. They could not only spam out big monsters every turn from both the hand and graveyard, they act as some of the best Xyz monsters for the time. They would be so powerful that their first hit, which banned all the babies, would do nothing to stop their dominance. They would continue to be a powerful deck for 7 more months before receiving their second hit, which limited all the daddies. This would finally rein them in for about a year until Dark Matter Dragon came out. This card sends 3 dragons to grave for cost, which mostly meant dumping 3 rulers. This would lead to some insane OTKs for 2015 when we finally banned the rulers. Babies would come back right after the daddies is banned, and they would come back slowly over the next several years. So what happened? Power Creep destroyed these guys. No quick effect, big minuses in hand, the only 1 effect per turn. They did receive new support with Tri-Star Mazes, but the core design is just too old to make anything better than Rogue. Construct is a fusion monster requiring a Shaddoll and a light monster. On summon, it dumps a Shaddoll monster, and when it's sent to grave, it adds back a Shaddoll spell trap. Also, if it battles a special summon monster, it destroys it at the start of the damage step. None of these effects are once per turn. So why did it get banned? Shaddoll was one of the decks released in Duelist Alliance. It was a deck of flip monsters that all had effects and they were sent to grave by a card effect. They also got access to the first fusion spell to use monsters from the deck, if you ignore future fusion. What this means is that if your opponent had a monster summoned from the extra deck, you could use Shaddoll fusion, dump any Shaddoll to do whatever, and any light monster to summon Construct. Construct could then send another Shaddoll monster to do something else, contest whatever monster your opponent had summoned while also being essentially immune to battle, and if the opponent did remove it, they could just add back the Shaddoll fusion and do it again next turn. Shaddoll would be a top deck for about a year before getting Construct banned in 2015. It would go back to 1 in 2019 and up to 3 later that year. So what happened? Construct was banned for way too long. By the time it came off the list, it had been pretty power crept. It would see play in some Invoke Dogmatic as Shaddoll list in 2021, but aside from that, it wouldn't make a huge impact. Its foolish effect and material is its best quality, and if Shaddoll ever gets some new support, expect to see this thing played. Breaker is a dark spellcaster that gets a spell counter on normal summon that gives it 300 attack. You can then remove the spell counter to pop a spell trap. So why did it get banned? Released in 2003, Breaker would be one of the best normal summons in the game. For one, it was decently big, 1600 attack was enough to get over most effect monsters, and if you kept the spell counter, it could trade with any normal summon. And that's what made Breaker so good, its versatility. Cards usually just did one thing, so cards that could be used for multiple purposes were very valuable. Not even mentioning how powerful the effect was too. MST and Heavy Storm were both limited at the time, and Breaker was mostly just MST attached to a body. Breaker would be limited in 2003, banned in 2007, limited later that year, banned in 2008, limited again later that year, then finally unlimited in 2009. So what happened? Cards started doing more. By 2009, there were things like Dark Arm Dragon, Stratos, and Synchros, and MST on a normal summon just wasn't good enough to be banned anymore. Spellbook of Judgment is a quick play spell that does nothing when you use it, but during the end phase, it searches spellbook spells up to the amount of spells you activated during the turn. Then you get to summon a spellcaster with a level less than or equal to the amount of spells used. So why did it get banned? Spellbooks, or the Prophecy archetype, was a powerful control deck from 2013. It had access to a Swiss Army knife of spellbooks that each did different things, but the card to put the whole thing together was Judgment. This was what allowed you to consistently fill your hand for the next turn. It also helped that you could summon Jowgen from the deck. Notably, this card was released at the same time as the Dragon Rulers and was the only thing stopping them from ever reaching tier 0. It was the only thing that could possibly keep up the sheer amount of advantage that deck could produce. This card will be banned in September 2013, stay banned for 9 years before getting limited in 2022 and unlimited in 2024. So what happened? This card gets you an insane amount of advantage, but there isn't a great way to utilize it, especially now that Jowgen is banned. Because it happens in the end phase, you likely won't get a chance to use any of the cards you searched. Firewall Dragon is a generic link 4 requiring 2+ monsters, and it could bounce cards equal to the amount of monsters co-linked with it, but the real effect was that if any monster you pointed to was sent to grave, you could summon any monster from your hand, not once per turn. So why did it get banned? FTKs, yeah! Since Master Rule 4 required links, it was nice to give every deck a boss that could generically help every deck. That was until Spiral Double Helix came out and broke Spiral. This deck could use Firewall's effect to continue spamming monsters to make huge extra link board. Took a bit of a break before coming back with a vengeance in 2018, aka the year of design mistakes. Now that the generic link pool had expanded, combo decks like Goki U-Link took over, but the real problem was Danger Dark World FTK. Basically, you would use the broken links at the time to set up Firewall Dragon, Cannon Soldier, and Grapha with a Dark World in hand. You tribute Grapha to burn with Cannon Soldier, triggering Firewall to summon the Dark World from hand, Grapha bounce the Dark World to reborn, and the cycle repeats until the game is over. This was just one of the FDKs that would lead to the death of Firewall Dragon in 2018. So what happened? Firewall got a errata in 2021 that is actually good. The summon from hand now can only summon a Cybers, and now it's a once per turn. The card did see some play in Malice, but that's about it. The card isn't bad, it's just specific now. Pot of Avarice is a normal spell that shuffles 5 monsters from your grave back into the deck, then draws 2 cards. So why did it get banned? Pot of Avarice was the first of the Pot of Greed retrains. It would actually be released about a month after Pot of Greed's ban. It would see play almost immediately as a staple in most decks. Since games went on for a while, it wasn't too hard to actually resolve this card. The cost severity also depended greatly on the deck you were playing. Some decks could easily fill up the grave with monsters, but most of them wanted those monsters to stay there. However, they played it because the ability to draw 2 on a generic card was just that powerful. It would be all around the list for 8 years before getting banned in 2013. This was around the time Konami tried banning a bunch of the powerful stable cards, and this was one of them. It was stay banned for 7 years before coming back back in 2020. So what happened? This card was banned for way too long, as arguably it wasn't even ban worthy to begin with. Avarice is just way too slow. Some Zodiac decks played it when it came back since it could recycle all your Xyz monsters, but it didn't stick around. Nowadays we have better pot cards, so there really isn't a need to play this card anymore. Shurit is a monster that can be used as the entire cost for the ritual summon of a Necros monster. Furthermore, if it's tributed by a card effect, it adds a Warrior Necros ritual, which is basically any of them. So why did it get banned? Rituals as a mechanic were for the longest time underpowered, to say the least. That is until the release of Necros. While it wasn't the first playable ritual deck, it was the first to be the best deck of its format, bordering on tier 0 in the TCG. This was because it fixed the biggest issues with rituals: consistency. The ritual monsters all doubled as hand effects, and since the ritual monsters couldn't use copies of themselves as material, Shurit's ability to pay the cost for any of them was very nice. Not only letting you ritual summon for little cost, you also got to search for another monster. Necros went through several waves of hits before finally Shurit was banned in 2015, ending the 9-month dominance of Necros. It would be unbanned in 2019. So what happened? Necros is probably aged the worst out of any tier 0 deck. It has no good quick effects, dies to any form of interruption, and its main strength, its consistency, isn't a big deal anymore. This deck would have likely faded away by 2017 even if Shurit was never hit. Also, they did get new support, but it's not very good. Denglong is a generic level 5 synchro tuner that adds a Yang Zing card on summon, usually 9 pillars, can dump a worm and copy its level, and if it leaves the field, summons a Yang Zing from deck. So why did it get banned? Denglong was a powerful synchro with an uncommon level. Since it could search any Yang Zing card, it made it so any level 5 synchro meant an Omni negate. The deck to take the most advantage of this would be True King Dino. This was a time with 3 Misc, 3 Lithosagem, and 3 Diagram. This led to a very powerful deck that could put up some crazy end boards for the time. Unfortunately, it was playable at the same time as Zodiac, which meant it wouldn't see much representation. That is until the World Championship. Yu-Gi-Oh! Worlds has a special ban list that combines both the TCG and OCG ban list, and the 2017 Worlds ban list destroyed Zodiac and allowed for True King Dino to thrive. The deck would go on to win, and like most decks that win Worlds, would be gutted on the next list, banning Denglong. It would be limited in 2023 and unlimited in 2024. So what happened? Denglong requires a ton of bricks. You have to play 9 pillars. Without Chiwen and Beyond, the card loses its potency. Especially now that Eve is banned, if you want to play a level 5 synchro tuner that requires a brick, just play Eve. For those watching in another tab or aren't looking at the screen, hi. And I meant to say now that Ib is unbanned. Towers is a level 10 earth machine that cannot be special summoned and requires 3 Cleaves for its tribute summon. Towers is unaffected by spell traps as well as monster effects from a monster with a level or rank less than its own. Special summon monsters lose 500 attack and defense, and once per turn you can force your opponent to send a card from their hand to field to grave. So why did it get banned? When Towers came out in 2014, unaffected monsters were exceptionally rare and hard to summon. There's a reason we call them Towers and not Venomenagas. Because of this, most decks didn't have plans for dealing with monsters like this, especially ones as resilient as Towers. This led to games ending the moment Towers hit the field. Decks like Burn and Kimbest famously struggled to beat cards with more than 2500 attack, and Shaddoll Construct with helpless against a normal summon Towers. The only convincing out was Diamond Crab King, who set its attack to 3000, bypassed Towers restriction, and crash. Unless you lived in Europe where you wouldn't have access to this card until Towers is already banned, which happened in 2015. It wouldn't be unloaded until 2018. So what happened? Master Rule 4 completely destroyed this card. Now the pendulums were significantly worse, it was harder to get the necessary tributes, and link monsters existing meant that most decks sent out Towers without even trying. Cerberus can't destroy Towers. Pretend it's Unicorn instead. Not even mentioning the fact that decks are just more equipped to deal with a card like Towers. Ptolemaeus is a generic rank 4 that needs 2+ force for its summon. It had the relevant effect 2, as a quick effect, attach 3 materials to rank up into any non-number rank 5. So why did it get banned? Tellarknight was a fine rogue deck, and ranking it up into Castellar Diamond was good, but it was by no means ban-worthy. That is until Performpow Pendulum, or Pepe. Pepe was a deck that quite literally did everything. Every card was a searcher, some even searched more searchers. Mind you, this was 2016, but the pièce de résistance was Ptolemaeus. Pepe was very good at spamming material, and Ptolemaeus was very good at using said material. Most often it would rank up into Cyber Dragon Nova, who could then go into the newly released Cyber Dragon Infinity, who, among many things, was an Omni negate. It got so bad that only a few weeks after Pepe would reach full power, Konami would completely kill the deck on their only adjusted list, which was pretty much an optional ban list that took the place of the normal ban list. It was weird, and Ptolemaeus would be on the adjusted list before actually getting banned in April 2016. It would stay there for 6 years before getting unbanned in 2022. So what happened? It just takes too much material. Current rank 4 decks could easily make it, they just don't have a need to. There are just way simpler ways to get to a disruption. Tribe-infecting Virus is a level 4 monster that can discard a card and declare a type of monster, then destroy everything with the declared type, not once per turn. So why did it get banned? Board wipes are absolutely broken in old Yu-Gi-Oh!, especially one that could theoretically do it every turn. One thing that is important to mention, from 2012 and earlier, Yu-Gi-Oh! Had what was called Ignition Effect Priority, which basically meant that you could use ignition effects like Tribe here as on-summon effects the turn they're summoned. Let's say my opponent has Bottomless Trap Hole set. If I normal Tribe, I can declare priority, letting me use the effect before my opponent has a chance to use Bottomless, which meant unless you negated the summon, your board was getting nuked. Not to mention it could be searched with Witch of the Black Forest. Tribe will be limited after only a month and will be banned in 2005. It will stay banned for 15 years before coming back to 3 in 2020. So what happened? It was a combination of Ignition Effect Priority being removed and being a board wipe that took both your normal summon and multiple cards in hand being way too much for 2020. Nowadays, with all the board wipes at 3, there isn't a need for this card anymore.